You walk away from the crash. The paramedics check you out, shaken, but okay. You give your information to the police, you call for a tow, and you text your family that you're fine. That's how most traumatic brain injury cases after a motorcycle accident in New York begin. Not in the ambulance, standing by the side of the road, feeling okay. Your helmet did exactly what it was designed to do. It absorbed the impact that would have fractured your skull. But TBI is a different mechanism entirely. When your head decelerates suddenly, your brain keeps rotating for a fraction of a second inside of it. Rotational force. Your helmet doesn't stop that. And there's no bruise, no cut, no outward sign of what's happening inside. We're going to talk about the symptoms that surface in the hours and days after the crash, why insurance companies fight TBI claims harder than almost any other injury, and why the first settlement offer in a brain injury case is almost never the right one. The legal picture here starts before you know you're hurt. Here's what a helmet actually does. A helmet is impact absorption technology. It takes the kinetic energy of your skull hitting the surface and spreads it over a larger area and a longer time window, reducing the force of the impact. That is the mechanism that prevents skull fractures and severe surface trauma. Helmets save lives. That is not in question here. What helmets do not do is stop the motion of your brain inside your skull. When your head stops suddenly in a crash, your brain continues moving for a fraction of a second. It rotates. It makes contact with the inner surface of the skull. The shear forces created by that rotation are the mechanism of traumatic brain injury. It's a different physics problem than the skull fracture, and it requires a different solution than what the helmet on your head is really designed to provide. There are helmets on the market with rotational protection technology built in. That is worth knowing about and worth looking into, but the baseline point stands. The forces that cause TBI are not the forces your standard helmet is designed to address. The crashes most likely to produce this kind of injury are the ones that happen without warning. Left turn impacts, rear end collisions, the crash that's over before you had time to react. We've covered those scenarios in other videos. The injury picture they could produce is a conversation of its own. Here's what the next 48 to 72 hours could look like. At the scene, you feel okay. Adrenaline is still running. You answer questions clearly. You decline the transport offer. Riders do this regularly. Most of the time, it's fine. Occasionally, it isn't. In the hours after a crash, TBI symptoms can surface gradually. A headache that won't clear with rest, sensitivity to light or sound, difficulty concentrating, a mental fog that doesn't resolve, nausea that comes and goes, balance problems, memory gaps around the period of the crash itself. The pattern to know: riders sometimes feel relatively okay in the first few hours and then deteriorate. Not dramatically or suddenly, but clearly in retrospect. If your helmet made contact with anything in the crash, including the pavement, the car that hit you, or the road after you went down, get evaluated the same day. Don't wait to see how you feel in the morning. Don't wait to see if the headache clears. The window when early intervention makes a difference is shorter than most people expect. Has anyone been through this? A crash where you thought you were fine and then you felt the symptoms hours or days later? Drop it in the comments. These stories matter, and I respond. The concussion question. Most people use concussion and traumatic brain injury interchangeably. They're related, but not the same. A concussion is a mild traumatic brain injury. A severe TBI involves more lasting structural changes, and the functional consequences are in a completely different category. What matters for riders is understanding that neither a concussion nor a more serious TBI always appears clearly on early imaging. A normal MRI in the first 72 hours does not rule out TBI. Symptoms are the primary diagnostic tool in the acute phase. An emergency room that sends you home with no abnormalities or imaging is giving you a snapshot of what imaging can and cannot capture at that moment in time. It is not an all clear for brain injury. If symptoms persist beyond 24 to 48 hours, you need a neurologist, not a second ER visit, not a wait and see approach, a neurologist who understands post-concussion and TBI presentations and who can build the documentation record that matters later. In 30 years of handling these cases, I have been first on the scene as an EMT when a rider seemed completely fine, oriented, talking, wanted to refuse transport, wanted to go check on the bike. And I have seen those same cases turn into serious TBI situations after the acute adrenaline wore off. The first hours are not always predictive of what comes next. That experience changes how I approach these claims because it's exactly that ambiguity that insurance companies use against injured riders. TBI claims are the ones insurance companies fight hardest. The reason is straightforward. TBI is invisible in a way that a broken bone is not. A broken femur shows up on an x-ray the same hour you walk into the hospital. TBI shows up in symptoms that a claimant reports, in neurological testing, in functions that have declined, in a life that looks different than it did before the crash. Insurance adjusters are trained to look at early imaging that came back normal and use it to argue that the injury isn't real or isn't serious or isn't connected to this particular crash. This is not a coincidence. It's a deliberate approach, and it works on riders who don't know what to document, don't know what medical follow-up to pursue, and don't know what their claim is actually worth. Let's talk about how these cases are evaluated in New York. New York requires that an injured party meet what is called the serious injury threshold to pursue certain categories of damages in a personal injury case. A documented traumatic brain injury with significant cognitive, neurological, or functional limitations can satisfy that threshold. But the way it is documented matters significantly. Subjective reports of symptoms without corresponding medical documentation create an opening for the insurance company to minimize or dispute the claim. This is why the medical record starts at the scene. What gets noted in the hospital, if you're transported, that also matters. What you report to your own doctor the next day if you're not. The documentation chain that begins on day one of a TBI case is the same chain that supports or undermines the claim months or years later. TBI cases in New York can involve long-term costs that take years to fully understand. Cognitive rehabilitation, loss of earning capacity, changes in personality and emotional regulation, ongoing neurological care that continues well past the point when an early settlement would have closed the file. These are real costs with real dollar values. They are simply costs that are not visible in the first few weeks after the crash. The settlement offer. If you receive a settlement offer from the at-fault driver's insurance company within the first weeks or months of a TBI case, here's what that offer reflects. The information available at that moment. What it does not reflect is the full cost of a brain injury that hasn't fully declared itself yet. Early offers are priced to close files. They're not priced to cover what a brain injury actually costs over the course of the years that follow. The cognitive changes that affect your ability to work, the rehabilitation that takes longer than anyone projected, the emotional picture that follows significant brain trauma. None of that is priced into what you are offered in week 3. Accepting an early settlement in a TBI case is one of the most common and costly mistakes I see in this practice. Once you settle, that is the end. There is no coming back for the costs that surface 6 months or 2 years later. The moment you sign that release, the file closes permanently. If someone you know is navigating this right now, the contact information is in the description. The conversation is free. The video I'll link below covers what to do in the first hours after a motorcycle crash in New York. If you haven't already watched it, that's the place to start. Has anyone been through a TBI situation after a crash? Your own family members or maybe somebody you know? I'd really like to hear from you in the comments.